9:47 p.m., the music died in Las Vegas. Slot machines froze, mid-spin cocktail glasses slipped from trembling hands, and the neon heartbeat of the strip turned cold blue under the glare of FBI helicopters. Screams echoed across the marble floors of a luxury casino as armed agents stormed through smoke and confusion. This was not a robbery. It was a federal siege, a full-scale joint operation between ICE and the FBI. And behind the glittering facade of America's playground, a Venezuelan crime syndicate was about to be exposed. Under President Trump's renewed internal security doctrine, the order had been clear no sanctuary for foreign criminal organizations on U.S. soil. The administration had already tightened deportation routes and restored Guantanamo Bay as a holding facility for transnational offenders. But nothing compared to what unfolded that October night, the largest urban anti-gang strike in Nevada's history. By dawn, 98 arrests had been made. Agents discovered vaults stacked with millions in cash, all traced to a single network, Trendy Aragua, a violent Venezuelan gang once born in a prison cell, now thriving inside America's entertainment capital. For years, they operated unseen laundering dirty money through slot machines and poker tables, converting drug and human trafficking profits into legal fortune. The casino's flashing lights had masked a criminal empire, one operating with military precision. Federal investigators later confirmed the gang's second-in-command, Giovanni Vicente Mosquera Serrano, was orchestrating operations across at least 15 U.S. states. The FBI's counterterrorism division classified the group as a foreign terrorist organization, placing it on par with MS-13 and Al-Shabaab in terms of structure and threat level. It was no longer just about immigration or crime. It was about sovereignty. Analysts from Reuters and The Guardian reported that the Vegas raid was not an isolated strike, but part of a new consequence-based enforcement doctrine, a legal shift granting federal agencies expanded power to treat organized gangs as combatant entities. The U.S. was redefining domestic security, and the line between police operation and counter-terror warfare had blurred. The implications reached beyond Nevada. In the same week, Israeli forces intensified precision raids against Iranian proxies in Syria, while Ukrainian commandos executed a drone assault on Russian logistics hubs near Bryansk. Across the Pacific, tensions simmered between the U.S. Navy and China's maritime militia near the Taiwan Strait. Each confrontation echoed the same principle: preempt, strike fast, and neutralize before the threat spreads. In America, the warfront wasn't in distant deserts or foreign seas. It was hidden behind casino walls and suburban gates. For the first time, ordinary citizens felt the tremor of counter-terror warfare at home. Some called it justice. Others feared it marked the dawn of a surveillance state where security outweighed freedom. When the lights came back on in Las Vegas, the question hung heavy in the air. How far will America go to protect its borders before it starts policing its own soul? It began far from the neon towers of Las Vegas, deep inside the concrete labyrinth of Tocoron Prison, Venezuela. Behind rusted gates and graffiti-scarred walls, a handful of inmates formed what would become one of the world's most sophisticated transnational crime syndicates, Trendy Aragua or Trende Aragua. What started as a local smuggling racket grew into a global operation that infiltrated governments, businesses, and eventually America itself. According to BBC News, and DW Tocoron was no ordinary prison. It was a fortress controlled not by guards, but by inmates. There was a nightclub, a swimming pool, even a zoo, all financed through extortion and trafficking. Within those walls, leaders of Trendy Aragua learned a critical lesson: power thrives where the state collapses. When Venezuelan authority crumbled, the gang built its own. By the mid-2020s, as political chaos drove millions to flee Venezuela, the gang spread across borders under the cloak of migration. From Colombia to Chile, then into Mexico, their network stretched like veins of corruption across the hemisphere. U.S. intelligence underestimated the danger. While politicians debated border walls and humanitarian corridors, Trendy Aragua's emissaries quietly embedded themselves inside legitimate industries, construction, logistics, and entertainment. By 2024, Reuters reported sightings of gang-linked operations in 15 U.S. states, including Texas, Florida, and Nevada. The organization's structure resembled that of a paramilitary force, regional commanders, encrypted communications, and strict internal codes. The group even issued uniforms and tattoos that identified hierarchy, echoing the early days of MS-13, but with corporate precision and far greater funding. American law enforcement had seen gangs before, but Trendy Aragua was something else, a hybrid of cartel militia and shadow corporation. Their financial footprint extended into cryptocurrencies, offshore accounts, and real estate portfolios. Defense news analysts noted that the gang's laundering methods mimicked those used by sanctioned regimes like Iran and North Korea, blending illicit and legitimate capital until both were indistinguishable. As they expanded, so did their violence. The Guardian highlighted cases in which members executed kidnappings in Georgia, extortion schemes in Houston, and contract killings in Florida. They were disciplined, efficient, and strategically invisible. Federal sources described their operations as criminal insurgency, a phrase once reserved for terrorist networks abroad. And through it all, they never raised alarms. There were no open gun battles, no graffiti-tagged streets, just a quiet infiltration of the American dream. They bought homes, started businesses, and moved money under the banner of normalcy. But what made this gang so different from others and so dangerous was not its brutality, but its adaptability. Like a virus, it mutated to survive law enforcement crackdowns. Every time a cell was dismantled, another emerged somewhere else, better hidden and digitally encrypted. By the time the FBI traced their funds to a glittering casino in Las Vegas, it wasn't just about catching gangsters, it was about exposing how fragile America's internal defenses had become. The irony wasn't lost on analysts. Just as the US warned Ukraine about hybrid warfare battles fought through finance misinformation and covert proxies, America itself had been infiltrated by a hybrid enemy. And just as Israel faces Iranian militias disguised as civilian traitors, or Taiwan faces Chinese hackers posing as business partners, the US had opened its doors to a quieter invader. Trendy Aragua didn't storm the border, it signed the lease. This was no longer a question of immigration policy. It was a question of sovereignty. How does a superpower defend itself from enemies who use its own systems, its own laws, its own freedoms as weapons? The answer, as Las Vegas would soon discover, was about to come under the flashing lights of the Strip. The casino looked like any other polished marble floors, champagne towers, and the rhythmic hum of slot machines echoing under golden chandeliers. But behind the glamour, the air was toxic with secrets. Every spin, every bet, every jackpot had become a link in a criminal chain worth hundreds of millions. Las Vegas, the city built on illusion, had become the perfect stage for deception. Federal agents later called it one of the most sophisticated money laundering systems ever uncovered on US soil. According to Reuters and The Guardian, the gang's operation began innocently small cash deposits from dozens of low-profile gamblers. These weren't tourists, they were trained operatives, each carrying chunks of dirty money from drug and human trafficking routes stretching back to South America. Here's how it worked. The money was divided into small sums distributed across hundreds of fake winners. Each played just enough to look legitimate, lose a little win, a little before cashing out. The casino issued receipts and tax slips, transforming criminal fortune into clean, traceable income. By the time those players walked out, their money was officially American, stamped and certified by the system itself. DW reported that this network reached beyond the Strip to offshore accounts in Panama shell companies in Miami and cryptocurrency exchanges in the Caribbean. The FBI found digital ledgers and encrypted transaction logs, evidence of financial activity stretching back 3 years. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. What startled investigators most was the professionalism. This was no sloppy gang operation. Trendy Aragua had hired accountants, digital engineers, and even former casino employees to manage the system. A senior ICE official described it as a corporate-level financial laundering mechanism disguised as entertainment. But the deeper the agents dug, the darker the truth became. Inside the casino's private vaults, they discovered hidden compartments containing $12.4 million in unregistered cash, untraceable chips, and counterfeit tax forms. Some VIP accounts linked back to ghost identities, all registered under foreign passports. The entire scheme functioned like a mirror world. Every legal transaction reflected a criminal one beneath. The casino had unknowingly become the nerve center of a global financial war. The dirty money didn't just fund drugs or smuggling, it financed human trafficking, contract killings, and arms deals stretching from the Venezuelan jungle to the ports of Ecuador and Colombia. This revelation shocked Washington. Defense news analysts compared it to the cyber financial networks once used by Russian oligarchs to evade Western sanctions, proof that criminal syndicates had evolved into geopolitical actors. America wasn't facing street crime anymore, it was facing economic insurgency. Strategically, the discovery came at a critical time. The US was already warning European allies of Russian dark money moving through neutral markets, and Israeli intelligence had traced Iranian funding lines disguised as charitable donations. Meanwhile, Chinese-linked criminal groups were accused by Al Jazeera of using cryptocurrency and casinos across Southeast Asia to move billions beyond US scrutiny. Each story mirrored the same flaw: nations too confident in their financial systems to see how deeply they were being exploited. And that's why Las Vegas mattered. It was no longer just an American scandal. It was a microcosm of global vulnerability. Every slot machine, every flashing light was proof that even the safest places could hide a battlefield. As dawn broke and the neon lights flickered back to life, the illusion shattered. The feds had turned the tables, but the damage had already been done. America had learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest threat to national security doesn't cross the border. It walks through the front door wearing a suit, carrying chips, and smiling at the dealer. So the question now was this: if Las Vegas can fall, how many other cities are already compromised and don't even know it? The federal response was swift, calculated, and relentless. By the morning of October 14, 2025, Las Vegas was under a lockdown more fitting for a battlefield than a resort town. 4 city blocks were sealed off, drones circled overhead, and tactical teams poured into the casino's gold-plated halls. The operation had been planned for weeks under the Department of Homeland Security's Joint Task Force X, codenamed Operation Silver Veil. At its core was a doctrine signed personally by President Trump, the consequence-based enforcement directive. It allowed federal agencies to treat criminal networks like Trendy not merely as lawbreakers, but as combatant entities threatening national sovereignty. In practice, this blurred the boundary between law enforcement and warfare. For the first time since the Patriot Act, domestic operations were conducted with military-style coordination, encrypted communications, real-time intelligence feeds, and contingency authorizations for lethal force if necessary. According to Reuters and DW, the White House had grown increasingly frustrated with what it called the shadow infiltration of foreign criminal organizations. The Vegas raid officials said would serve as both deterrent and declaration that America was done playing defense. Trump's national security team, led by Secretary of Homeland Defense Pete Hegseth, viewed it as the domestic counterpart to the administration's Global Defend Forward doctrine, which had already reshaped U.S. posture abroad. The mission unfolded like a cinematic sequence. Helicopters hovered over the Strip, red and blue lights reflected off hotel windows, and armored trucks rolled into position. Inside, gamblers stood frozen as dozens of agents moved in sync, clearing tables, sealing vaults, and locking every exit. It took just 13 minutes for the casino floor to be secured. Behind the scenes, FBI Director Christopher Wray coordinated from a command center in Quantico, while the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit traced digital assets in real time. Within hours, over $30 million in frozen accounts were identified. Every name, every alias, every numbered account linked to Trendy network was marked for seizure. The raid wasn't just tactical, it was symbolic. America was reclaiming control over its narrative of security. For years, critics accused Washington of losing grip over its borders and its streets. Now, under Trump's directive, agencies were given unprecedented latitude to strike hard and fast. The Guardian noted that the new approach resembled Israel's targeted containment policy precision operations designed to disrupt terrorist financing without destabilizing entire regions. Similarly, U.S. planners saw Trendy as a domestic insurgency one that had to be dismantled surgically, not through prolonged investigations that allowed criminals to adapt. But this new doctrine carried its own moral storm. Legal scholars warned of creeping militarization of law enforcement. Could treating a criminal network as a terrorist entity set a precedent for future domestic crackdowns? And how long before the definition of threat expanded to include political dissent or organized protests? Across Europe, DW reported similar tensions. Germany's crackdown on extremist funding, Israel's preemptive raids in Gaza, and Ukraine's counter-sabotage campaigns in occupied zones all raised the same question: where does justice end and control begin? Still, for Washington, the success was undeniable. The arrests crippled the gang's U.S. financing pipeline and signaled to the world that the administration was willing to extend the war on terror not outward but inward. Inside the Situation Room, the message was clear. This wasn't about one casino. It was about drawing a red line inside America. And as dawn broke over the Strip, that red line glowed under the flashing lights, etched forever in the memory of a city that thought it was untouchable. Now, with federal powers expanded and precedent set, one question remained: has America secured its safety or merely traded liberty for the illusion of control? By sunrise, Las Vegas was silent, but the aftershocks thundered across the nation. Within 24 hours, ICE and FBI field offices from Houston to Miami launched synchronized raids under the same directive that had ignited Operation Silver Veil. Over 700 arrests followed in the first wave, targeting suspected affiliates of Trendy Aragua and its financial partners. America's law enforcement machine was moving with wartime urgency. Reuters confirmed that more than 100 individuals were flown to Guantanamo Bay, marking the first time in decades that the facility had been used for domestic-linked foreign offenders. Administration officials described it as a necessary measure to isolate high-risk detainees from U.S. soil. Critics, however, warned that the line between justice and political theater was vanishing fast. Across Nevada, fear and fascination collided. Casinos tightened surveillance. Hotels doubled private security. Locals who once celebrated the Strip's glitz now whispered of infiltration and betrayal. Vegas felt untouchable, a former security consultant told The Guardian, but after this, we all realized how easy it is for evil to blend in. The panic spread beyond the desert. In Florida, police uncovered a trafficking hub linked to the same Venezuelan network. Texas reported kidnappings tied to cartel cells. In Colorado, a Trendy Aragua faction had allegedly seized an entire apartment complex, extorting tenants under threat. DW reported that residents described the scene as a ghost neighborhood run by invisible landlords. The implications went far beyond crime. Economically, the FBI's confiscations rippled through banks and cryptocurrencies. Financial markets watched nervously as questions arose about the scale of global money laundering hidden in legitimate sectors, gaming, housing, even tech startups. If Las Vegas can be compromised, said a defense news analyst, so can Wall Street. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera drew a striking parallel. As Washington dismantled Trendy Aragua's domestic network, Israel was simultaneously executing high-precision strikes against Iran-backed militias in Syria. Both campaigns carried the same DNA rapid extrajudicial-style enforcement justified by the logic of preemptive defense. America's war on cartels, the network wrote, is starting to resemble its war on terror. But that war had a human cost. Families in Venezuelan and Colombian diaspora communities found themselves under scrutiny. Thousands faced deportation hearings, some wrongly swept into investigations. Civil rights groups accused the government of criminalizing entire migrant populations. Yet for others, the operation was long overdue proof that Washington was finally confronting the transnational crime web that had flourished under previous lenient policies. Behind closed doors, the Trump administration celebrated the operation as a domestic counter-terror victory. Publicly, the president declared, "We are restoring American control city by city, street by street." The message resonated with millions who feared the collapse of law and order. But among experts, another question brewed. Was this the beginning of a new intelligence state? The FBI's expanded data authority now allowed AI-based predictive tracking of financial patterns, mirroring Ukraine's use of battlefield algorithms against Russian supply lines. Technology once built for war was now aimed at domestic crime. Internationally, allies watched closely. BBC News reported that European agencies were studying the operation as a model for combating cartel infiltration in Spain and Italy. China, however, condemned the raids as state aggression under the guise of law, hinting at its own tension with Washington over security crackdowns in Macau's casino district. Back in Nevada, the Strip glittered again, but something had changed. The air carried unease, the silence before another storm. Behind every jackpot, there lingered a question that no flashing light could distract from. If the world's freest nation can turn its casinos into battlegrounds, what will it take before freedom itself becomes collateral damage? The Vegas raid was more than a police triumph, it was a geopolitical signal. When the FBI and ICE dragged nearly 100 gang operatives from the casino floor, it wasn't just about arrests, it was about reclaiming American prestige. Under President Trump, Washington had redrawn the line between enforcement and deterrence, declaring that any network gang cartel or covert financier threatening U.S. security would be treated as an enemy combatant. The world was watching. As Reuters and BBC noted, global reactions split sharply. Western allies from London to Berlin praised the efficiency of the operation, calling it a blueprint for hybrid security enforcement. But human rights observers warned that America was treading a dangerous path, one where every criminal could be branded a terrorist. In an age of algorithmic surveillance and preemptive raids, could liberty still coexist with absolute security? DW reported that European counter-terror agencies quietly requested access to post-raid data, seeking seeking to adapt similar tactics against Balkan crime rings. Meanwhile, in Latin America, Venezuela's government denied all involvement, even as The Guardian confirmed that Tocaron prison, birthplace of the trendy Aragua Empire, had mysteriously gone dark days after the raid. Sources claimed a fire, others suspected a targeted strike carried out with US coordination. Strategically, the Vegas takedown achieved more than disruption. It sent a psychological message to every transnational syndicate the game had changed. Financial secrecy, offshore laundering, encrypted communication, none of it guaranteed safety anymore. America had extended its warfighting doctrine into the realm of economics and domestic law. Defense News called it the first domestic reflection of a global counterinsurgency mindset. But the deeper consequence was spiritual. Las Vegas, once a monument to freedom, chance, and indulgence, had become the stage where the nation redefined what freedom meant. Tourists returned, lights blinked back to life, yet something intangible had shifted. The Strip no longer represented limitless opportunity. It symbolized vigilance. Every camera, every ID check, every glance from a security officer was a reminder that the invisible war continued. Internationally, the pattern echoed elsewhere. Ukraine's counterintelligence was dismantling Russian proxy networks in Odessa. Israel's Mossad was neutralizing Iranian financiers in Dubai. The US-China standoff in the Pacific turned increasingly digital cyber raid sanctions and financial interdictions, replacing traditional warfare. The battlefields of 2025 were spreadsheet servers and encrypted chat rooms. In this new world order, the difference between a terrorist, a cartel, and a corporate entity blurred into one word threat, and that realization forced a reckoning in every democracy. How far could a nation go to protect itself before it began policing its own citizens? Even within the United States, debate roared. Civil libertarians argued that the consequence doctrine risked eroding constitutional rights. Supporters countered that freedom meant nothing without security to defend it. The haunting image of that October night, flashing lights, the hum of helicopters, terrified tourists on casino floors became the visual metaphor of an America caught between vigilance and fear. As Las Vegas rebuilt its image, new legislation advanced through Congress, expanding federal powers over financial surveillance and border security. The FBI announced its next phase, Operation Silent Web, a digital crackdown on cartel-linked crypto networks expected to span 5 continents. The war was going underground, invisible, but omnipresent. And so, under the blinding lights of a city that once worshipped chance, the United States stood at a crossroads between liberty and control. The casino floor, now a crime scene, whispered an uneasy truth: freedom and vigilance can never fully coexist, one must always shadow the other. As the neon glow returned to the Strip and the roulette wheels spun again, a question lingered beneath the noise. If America must watch everyone to stay safe, who will watch America? The October 2025 Las Vegas casino raid became a defining moment in America's new era of internal security. Under President Trump's consequence-based enforcement doctrine, ICE and FBI agents exposed the Venezuelan cartel Trendy Aragua, a network that had turned one of the Strip's most famous casinos into a money-laundering empire. The operation marked the fusion of counterterrorism tactics with domestic policing, granting federal agencies military-style authority to strike swiftly against transnational gangs. Across the nation, thousands were arrested as similar raids spread from Texas to Florida. Abroad, allies studied America's playbook while adversaries warned of creeping authoritarianism. Analysts from Reuters, DW, and The Guardian compared the operation to Israel's counterinsurgency model targeted fast and legally gray. The raid shattered illusions about where America's wars are fought. The battlefield was no longer distant, it was at home, inside its cities, banks, and casinos. In securing its sovereignty, the US had redrawn the boundary between freedom and